The hosts and guests on Everything's Messy podcast are not licensed healthcare professionals. The discussions in our episodes are not personalized medical advice. Always consult a qualified healthcare provider for medical guidance. Never delay seeking professional medical advice or emergency assistance because of our podcast. We encourage consulting with a healthcare professional before making any significant health changes. By listening to our podcast, you agree to the disclaimer. Thank you for listening to Everything's Messy podcast. Hey, welcome to Everything's Messy podcast, where we celebrate the beautiful but messy life experiences that most, if not all, people go through. Get ready to embark on an exciting journey through the raw and unfiltered stories of everyday people. Here, we dive into messy realities of life, from making messy mistakes to triumphs and everything in between. Are you sensing a theme? That's right, it's messy. But this just isn't about the mess. It's about finding strength and resilience in the midst of it all. We'll explore how health, fitness, and wellness play a crucial role in navigating life's twists and very messy turns. And we'll challenge conventional systems, because sometimes the most unconventional paths lead to the greatest discoveries. Join us as we embrace the messy, beautiful, and endlessly fascinating stories. Each episode is a testament to the power of our messy journeys and the beauty that emerges from the mess. So grab your favorite beverage, coffee, sparkling water, whatever it may be, and prepare to be inspired. Are you ready? Let's get messy. Hey everyone, welcome back to Everything's Messy. I am your messy host, Sarah. So joining me today, I have Inna Segal, best-selling author of The Secret Language of Your Body, helping millions reclaim inner health and power. She has dedicated over 2 decades to helping people unlock the secrets of their body's wisdom, facilitating profound healing for physical, emotional, and energetic levels. Welcome, Inna.
Thank you so much for having me, Sarah.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So this is a pretty specific thing in the wellness field to kind of tap in. I mean, we're always trying to say, our mind kind of dictates what we're going to feel, how we're going to stay disciplined and things like that. But you seem to go a little bit deeper with power and energy and things like that. And I assume this came from a messy story. Do you want to jump off there?
Yeah, as it usually does. Yeah, very messy. I feel like, it's good for people to understand how I was born in Eastern Europe, and my grandparents had gone through the war. Essentially, my grandfather ended up in Siberia in a labor camp for something he didn't do for 10 years, and my grandmother essentially was part of a family of 8, and her mother and her 7 brothers and sisters were killed. So she was 13 when the war started. And then they never talked about what happened really for 50 years, and
just repressed everything.
Yeah,
suppressed and just to be specific, we're talking about World War II?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I noticed that I had issues with my digestive system from when I was very young, but so did everybody else in the family. I mean, I noticed this later when I started to pay attention, but it started with me just having issues with food and digesting food and pain. And then we moved to Australia when I was 10, and here I was really struggling with going to school, not knowing one word of English, and being bullied, being from the wrong country, essentially, which led to constant feeling of anxiety and stress and crying every day.
Yeah. What was your native language?
Russian, so it's
Russian. Okay.
Yeah. Wow. So I was born in Belarus. Yeah, so coming to school and being treated pretty badly. I mean, the movies that, even though I wasn't born in Russia, that's the language everybody had at the time where I lived, in USSR, whether you were in Ukraine or wherever you were, you spoke the same. And I found it extremely hard because I felt very accepted before I came to Australia, and really rejected when I was here, and just struggling, which was the complete opposite that my parents felt. So it's quite an interesting, it was a really interesting dynamic, because in a way, they felt like they could express themselves, they could say whatever they want and be free. I mean, they still found it hard to assimilate into the culture, but I just found it hard because kids can be very cruel, and anyone who's different gets attacked. So that led to me crying, complaining on a daily, daily. And my parents went, all right, well, how about we, pay for a private school, which at that time there were different some of the private schools gave, huge discounts to people from Eastern Europe. So, they were giving me another option. I was like, well, let me try and see. And I think the challenge that they didn't perceive was that we came from enormous stress to do with money. Like, it was a constant stress. Whereas the people in that school, besides the people that I became friends with, obviously, who were from Eastern Europe, came from incredible wealth, like super wealthy people. And that was a real challenge for me.
So you were still sort of odd man out, even though maybe a little bit better circumstances, but a little bit harder maybe to keep up with the Joneses, as people like to say.
Well, yeah, just being attacked for being, not speaking the language perfectly at the time, because obviously I spoke more, but really from, not being wealthy. And and I felt like everybody was struggling. Within about a year, I started noticing that most of my friends were self-protecting. So they were, having this scoliosis type of a look in terms of their spine, whereas I didn't really get that, thankfully, but I started getting lower back pain. And later on, as I started writing my book, The Secret Language of Your Body and so on, made a lot of connections that lower back pain is connected to, self-confidence, support, and in particular finances.
Mm.
So it actually makes a lot of sense to me that, my degeneration, my messiness of my back started then. And I also forgot to mention that I started getting psoriasis when I first went to school, which again runs in the family, but definitely was activated by me not feeling comfortable in my skin. And then eventually I had back pain, I had digestive issues, I had psoriasis, I got a lot of anxiety. And I also had this massive loss of a child when at term. So ended up having a stillbirth, which was really traumatic, something I did not consider could even happen in Australia or expected. I kind of blew up in just pain in areas that I didn't even think you could really have pain. And while I was younger, I was always seeing medical professionals because that's what my mum was into. But about at 18, I met my partner at the time, and he was very open to alternative medicine. So I had seen a lot of alternative medicine practitioners, but with the attitude of they're going to fix me, they're going to do, whatever they need to do. And I just show up and plonk myself on the chair or the table, and then the rest is up to them type of thing. And it wasn't really working. So we got to a point where I could hardly move. My back was in so much pain. And but at that stage, I was seeing a chiropractor 3 times a week.
That's a lot.
Yeah, which I think is actually what most people start with, but I just kept going, and I'd have a little bit of change and then I'd go back into pain and so on. And so finally, when I ended up seeing him on this particular time, which was kind of my life-changing moment, I was in agony, my back was twisted. He actually came out of his office and said, your back's stuck. And I was like, yeah, I know that part. What are you going to do to help me? And he just went silent for a moment and then said, nothing. There's nothing I can do. Your body wants to be stuck. Go home. It took me a while to appreciate what he did and understand it. So I was extremely angry at the beginning. But on the way home, something changed in me, and I kind of went, I wonder if this body has this language that I don't understand. So I'm speaking English and it's speaking Japanese to me.
Sure, sure.
And I'm a very curious person. So I thought, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go home and I'm going to heal myself. I'm going to figure out this language. So I didn't really know what I was doing. But on the way, when I got home, the first thing I did was just placing my hands on my back to support it and then breathing with the pain instead of holding my breath. Because most people hold their breath because they're afraid of pain. And then I was counting backwards from 30 because my mind was very negative, and it occurred to me halfway through this counting that maybe I should ask for divine help. And it was a very conflicting experience because I wasn't really sure what I believed after this loss of this child, but I thought I'll ask anyway. I just felt this warmth move through my body. My eyes were closed. I could see this golden light, and I thought, all right, something's happening. And then it just occurred to me again to ask, I wonder if I could see my back. I really don't know where that thought came from. But at the same time as I asked within a moment, it literally felt like this light bulb went on and I could really see my back. And after my initial fright, I started saying, show me why, not from a victim perspective like I had done previously, but really show me why I have this. I mean, I could kind of understand some of it, but the loss of the child and all of that, but why has it been there for so long? And I was getting really scared about not being able to walk properly. So I started getting all these images that I was just spoke about. I could see being bullied and have memories of it. I could see images of going to the other school. Of my parents also had conflict around money constantly, being part of that. I started to get kind of insights into my own loss, meets my grandmother in particular, and how it, because I could hardly eat at that stage. I really wasn't doing well, and I was just like, my body was just not processing food. I also, and then just high level of anxiety all the time. And so I realized I was also this sponge. I just take everybody's energy on, especially if I was around somebody who needed help or if I felt very vulnerable myself.
Yeah.
And so with all these insights and some crying, I fell asleep, and as I was falling asleep, I could feel and sense my body unwinding. There was a really different feeling inside of me. And when I woke up the next day, although there was still pain, there was about 30% of pain left, I could feel so different, and my body was so expanded almost. Like there was a real connection that occurred, and it's hard to express that in words, but it was like my body and I were finally in touch with each other.
It's so interesting. And, a lot of times on this show, we talk about some of the symptoms you've have mentioned is, autoimmune related or parasitic related, different things like that. But you're talking about trauma, right?
Yeah.
And generational trauma
Yeah.
that you felt and hung onto that was giving a physical symptom of that deep rooted trauma. And I don't think that's talked about nor studied enough because there is a correlation of the and a lot of the times our body even will block out that trauma, almost trying to protect us, right? But we're still carrying that angst. We're still carrying that around us. And so you're manifesting through physical pain and generationally. That's a lot of trauma.
Well, it was, and it was really interesting to me because part of the anxiety that I was feeling was that I was going to be homeless. It was intense, and it's not like I've ever been homeless or that even when I was having it, I had already had my own home. And I remember having a conversation with my cousins one day, and they said the same. And I thought, okay, this is really interesting because both of my grandparents from that side of the family that I'm talking about had not had a home around the times that we started feeling like that.
So it's
And
rooted deep. That's deep.
yeah, it was extremely deep. And what was also interesting that as I was, for the next few weeks, as I was really working and just understanding myself and journaling and asking questions, my psoriasis, which was also generational, my dad has it, his sister's covered with it, my grandfather had it, disappeared. My back pain disappeared, and my anxiety just kind of started to dissolve. The digestive issues took a long, long time. I'm going to be honest with that because it was really, really intertwined in this trauma of loss. And I had to go on a real journey with it. And I still have to be, I always say, I still have to, be aware. And I'm grateful, but I have to be aware of what goes into my mouth and when, during which part of the day. And I can pretty much eat most things, not the best with lactose, but most things and be okay, which was not the case for most of my life, for a lot of my life, I should say. So it's only been, the last probably 10 years where there's been this massive improvement and definitely more since I separated from my ex-husband. So
More
I'm gonna
trauma.
say, yeah.
Wow. And so the premise behind it is, right, it's all connected, mentally, spiritually, physically. It's all intertwined. It's like the braid that we talk about. And some of it might manifest it differently, different levels in each of the three, but it's all sort of connected. So if you're not dealing with one part, or you're only dealing with one part, you're still having two other, things essentially that are not being dealt with or are not being addressed. And so you're not going to heal completely, so to speak, if we're not addressing all three things. And we talk about this on the show all the time. And, having gone through a heart attack, that trauma with, I didn't want to repeat it. I don't want to have those things. Like that's rooted deep. And then that, kind of is the rabbit hole that leads to the next thing and leads to the next thing. And so it's sort of all connected. And for you to be aware and be able to trace it back generationally, and you sort of absorbed all of it, right? And it was inside, and you had these feelings like you talked about of homelessness. I mean, that is not only extremely self-aware, but extremely deep-rooted trauma.
Well, it is. I mean, because also when people in the family, like my grandmother, felt both my grandparents from both sides actually felt very scared of sharing. My dad's dad also went, so this was my mom's parents, but my dad's parents, um, his father was also in Siberia and has my dad doesn't even know the story at this time, because his dad just never spoke about it. And when you're surrounded with it and it's not processed at all, like my mom talked about that when she was younger, she found it really hard to connect to my grandmother, even though I had a very, very powerful and strong relationship with my grandmother. It was like we were very, very connected, but she couldn't do it with my mom. And my mom always says it was like she didn't know why she was so rejected because as a child, she couldn't understand why my grandmother was completely cut off from her feelings. But obviously,
Survival.
to feel through anything that went in her life was really extremely, extremely difficult for her to a point that just before she died, when she ended up getting leukemia, which I knew 100% she was going to get a blood disease. You can't go through the trauma that my grandmother went through and not do any work on it and then have nothing. And so I was just shocked that it happened later on in life. So she was already in her late 70s when she was diagnosed. And I was saying to her, by the time that I really knew the level of it, there was not much you could do besides pain relief. which I really helped her with. But she had really, I'd never seen her cry except when I had the loss of the baby. She would not stop, but not cry, not share her feelings. And I said to her, and I just kept talking to her. I was like, do you feel loved in your life? Do you feel lucky or unlucky? And she said, oh, I feel so lucky. I do feel loved by you. I was like, do you feel the feeling of life, love? Describe it to me. Because I wanted to know that she was able to open up, because I spent the most time with her out of everyone, as I was growing up. And and she was like, "Yeah, yeah, I feel it as warmth." And then I said to her, it is very, very important that at some point you feel your feelings. Like, it is vital." And I never saw her do that, but I heard from my aunt that 2 days before she died, my aunt was there helping her, and my grandmother started crying, and my aunt said, "Why are you crying?" Because my grandmother didn't actually consciously know she had leukemia. We didn't think it was in the state and who she was. It wasn't the best idea for her to know. And so my aunt said, "Why are you crying?" And she said, "I don't feel I've got long left." And Ina told me it was something I needed to do. So it wasn't that she cried because
Sure.
she even had a connection. It was because she trusted me so much, and she knew she'd made an agreement or a promise to me, so she was
Go
letting
with
go.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. That's amazing. And we talk about um, the greatest generation, right, which is after World War II, but they're also the silent generation, right? They didn't talk about their feelings, and probably for survival reasons because of the hardship and the things that they saw, right? And then, you have the baby boomers who came afterwards, which were a little more in touch, but still kind of, children seen and not heard kind of era, right? Then you have, I'm a Gen X, and we just, wanted to fight everything in the world. We just wanted to be scrappy and fight. But I feel like each generation is a little more in touch with feelings. We're getting better at, talking about it, describing it, if we need help, to get the help that we need. But I do feel there is something to be said about that greatest generation being silent. If anything, they were able to master survival, right? And even though it has these sort of long, you know, after symptoms, if you will, their survival techniques were, had to be.
And also, I have to say, I had always seen my grandparents as victims until I was about 22, after I already had my own
Interesting.
healing. And one day it was about their 50th wedding anniversary, and it's just the most incredible experience. I was going up to the restaurant to celebrate, and something switched in my mind, and it was like I could only see people's souls, and I couldn't really see their physical bodies. It was like it was flipped. And as I saw my grandparents for the first time in my life at that point, I went, "Oh my God, they're not victims at all. They were the most courageous souls and people ever." And what I can learn the most from them is courage that is just, beyond anything that anybody of any other generation that I was
Yeah.
connected to had.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I really took that on board at that point. It was just the most beautiful experience. I remember absorbing it literally and going, I'm going to use this in my life. And so every time I felt scared in my life, where I've traveled a lot, I've taught a lot in a lot of countries, and every time I go to a new country with a different language, there'd be a little
Sure.
fear of
Right.
how's this gonna work, how's this gonna be, and I'd always think of my grandparents, and I'd go, "What are you afraid of, Ina? I mean, seriously, get on the plane, get off,
Sure.
figure it out.
You can
It's not like you're in the
kind of
war."
courage. Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Right. Right.
yeah,
Yeah,
really
and
helped.
that's such an interesting perspective to see that. Did you Did you just adopt the mentality of they were victims, or did they show that? Where did that
No,
come?
it came from me, and I think I was probably the first, like you were talking about the generation of fighting and so on. I think I was the first generation of asking questions. I feel like my parents were kind of taught not to ask, whereas I was that generation where I was like, tell me what happened. And they had immigrated as well from Belarus to Australia, but several years after we had. And so I was old enough to start asking those questions when they had come here. I was too young when we were in Belarus. And so we started bonding as well as I was asking. But in my young mind, it was like they've gone through such trauma, they've gone through such pain. And I'm thinking, as you know, someone living in Australia, they never got to travel. They lived in a house with no toilet, with no water, with like
Everything
zero
we take
kind
for
of
granted. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. And so in my mind, I was like, I felt sorry for them. I felt like they, even me, before coming to Australia, my parents and I and my brother, we went to Vienna, we went to Italy. We ended up spending 10 months in Italy before coming to Australia. It was something, I loved Italy. I really felt loved there and accepted and supported. And, my parents would always take us to different places, not so much overseas, but more, where we lived, like, 3 hours
Still
away,
trapped.
2 hours away. And I just felt like my grandparents had missed out on those types of things. And, so it was definitely me as opposed to them. They never really heard them complain about these types of things or say that they didn't have enough. It was always the opposite. It was always, if I would go there to visit, there'd be so much food. Like my grandmother spent a lot of time in the kitchen. I have to say that did not pass down to me, but I was a little traumatized seeing that and my mom, but it was always like, putting other people first and showing that they had food and everything for other people. Not always, in terms of eating healthy themselves, but the best was for others. And so it was really interesting for me to observe that.
I love that. The best was for others. I feel like that sort of embodies that whole generation. They
Yeah.
made sure the rest of us had the best, right? And then the other 2 words today I feel is courage and strength because we don't know. We have no idea. And with all our modern day conveniences and the things that we have today at the touch of a phone, at you can, to be delivered by this afternoon, just things that, we don't want for anything. And they, I just imagine some of the horrors that they experienced that we will, fortunately, because they did sacrifice, we don't have to.
I think what was really interesting for me to unpack and sit with was that I started seeing a lot of clients from when I was about 22, and I'd have people who had, not we wouldn't even call it trauma compared to my grandparents, but some challenges, and immediately they would have breakdowns, they would be depressed, they would have anxiety, all this stuff. Whereas my grandparents, it was, to me, it was quite amazing. There's never talk of depression until, I'm going to say, until my grandfather was about 75 and he started having dementia, which again made complete sense to me because my grandmother talked a lot about what happened to her from when I was about 13. But he very, very rarely did he say anything. And the time that he did, the one time I remember where I kind of pushed and pushed for him to say it, what he shared, which, as you were saying, was so traumatic. I literally could not stop myself from crying. And when he saw me cry, he went, "Okay, it happened 50 years ago. Forget about it."
Right.
You know, that type of thing. And yeah, it was really kind of interesting to have very little of that. And I ended up doing a little process with my grandfather where after this whole experience, because I knew he would never do his own healing, and usually I'm not for this, but I kind of felt like after he and I really connected and had this conversation, and by that stage I had 2 children and my daughter was maybe, 2 years old or 3 years old or something. And she was with me when he was sharing all this, which I can understand. He kind of went, "Oh my God, you're crying, you're gonna upset her." And on the way home, I remember I was really, really holding it in. And when I got home, I said to my partner at the time, and I'm going into the bathroom. If you hear screaming and crying, do not come in under any circumstances. Just look after the kids. And when I actually got into the shower, and for some reason I have lots of deep experiences there, I literally connected to that 14-year-old child that my or teenager that my grandfather was when he was taken to Siberia. I mean, nobody knew for 10 years what was going on with him. And in that archetypal way, I said to him, "Look, I know you can't feel or cry or scream. I will do it for you. So give me your feelings." And oh my God, Sarah, I cried and I could feel that it wasn't mine. And it was like howling because he'd never allowed himself to experience that. And after that, for the next, it was a few weeks, I work with this archetypal image of his teenager, because what was really interesting for me was that I had to keep him in this dark room for weeks because I was like, okay, energetically and visually, I'm gonna get him to go outside because it was like he was stuck in a cell, which is what, when you have dementia or Alzheimer's, it's kind of like that. You're stuck in this. And so I couldn't get him out for weeks and weeks where, I would kind of go, "Hey, I'm going to imagine a little bit of sun coming in." And because he would, the time once when I tried to bring more sun into his space, like if this is energetically, right? He literally started falling apart because he was bones.
Mm.
So when my grandfather left, he was 24 years old and weighed 24 kilos. So,
Oh, jeez.
yeah, and he's not a short man. So he was literally bones. And how many times he told me he had a gun at his head and all sorts of things. Like the courage was and intuition was incredible. And I remember when I finally felt like that part of him that had been pushed down, that ancestral part, and totally suppressed, when I felt like it became healthier, I remember, and I was traveling a lot. I ended up calling. And by that stage, I was having difficulty calling my grandparents if my grandfather picked up the phone because the depression that started happening in terms of the dementia, it was heavy and he was so negative. He kind of went from a very positive person where I was like, "How is he positive? How could he have this life and be positive?"
Yeah.
To all of a sudden flipping into that negativity that a lot of people do as they get into dementia. And I call him up. I call my grandparents and I'm thinking, hope my grandmother picks up. And my grandfather picked up the phone and I was thinking, how do I say hello and not ask him, "How are you?" Because it was traumatizing. And I said, "Hi, hi." And all of a sudden, it was like I had my old grandfather back, and he used to like recite poetry to me and say jokes. And he's reciting this poem and joking and saying, "Life is good." And honestly, for the next several years, it was like the dementia went on pause and his depression, it was like it disappeared until my grandmother died. So I think it was about 5 years. And, and then it really hit. But everybody in the family would call me, and because nobody knew I did that, and they would say, "Just wondering, have you noticed anything different with, with granddad?" And including my mom, and I was like, "Yeah, I have. He's really positive, and he's gone back to being funny, and he seems more there and clearer." It was quite an amazing experiment for me in a way.
That's just, amazing, and I also think too, you know, the brain is just this amazing thing that can survive, overcompensate, hide memories, bring memories back. Like, it is just amazing. And now starting to understand that neuroplasticity isn't concrete, that you can change those things and give a better memory or give a better feeling. And just the way that we're dealing with it now. Imagine if we had that back then and what that might have done for people that went through such trauma. Like, I just can't even and, we talk about PTSD these days, and it's very real and especially in the military and people that have experienced those things, but you never really hear about the victims of, the by process of what's happening and those kinds of things. And just imagine, that, like you had said, it was 5 years of sort of breaking the chains and being able to come out into the light, and then, of course, then your grandmother passes away, and that sort of puts him right back into his jail cell, if you will, having to just process all over again. And I think, at that point, I know I'm speaking for myself, but I would be tired and just so, overwhelmed and all of these things, because one side of me says, yes, processing and purging is just so we need to get it out. But then the other part of me says, yes, but it's exhausting. It hurts and it's not easy and it takes time. That takes time. And so I can see both sides of how people, maybe they don't necessarily even mean to give up, but they're exhausted with it. Right.
I think what was really interesting for me was that my grandfather, on like literally the day, I think the day before my grandmother was taken to the hospital, and she, was in a coma, he said to me in front of, while she was in and out, and my uncle was there who doesn't believe in anything to do with healing, and my cousin was there, and he said, "I don't know how it works. I don't know what Ina does. I just know that it's helped my wife. I've
Mhm.
seen it. I know that it helped her. I know that she was able to take away her pain." And he kept repeating that, which was really powerful because I also helped him.
Sure.
And I would, he often got headaches. And of course, my grandmother would go help him. Don't help me. He's the one who needs help.
The
You
best
know,
for everyone else, right?
exactly. You know.
That's just an incredible story. So, if somebody has this, built up trauma, they're trying to process, they don't know what to do, how can they work with you?
Well, I give people a lot of guidance and support on showing them what to do, because as much as I was able to do it for my grandfather, that's not really the way that it works. The way that it works is having the person do it themselves in most cases. And so I have a lot of courses, and starting with master classes, starting with free classes that somebody, and they're about, I think, 3 hours long, some of them 4. Just giving people an opportunity to start to firstly have an understanding. I always feel like you need to understand, and then just connecting slowly and gently. And all of my free masterclasses have processes. And then if you feel like you want to become friends with your body, going deeper, and actually, we don't necessarily want to jump into trauma release straight away. Everyone is different and we need to build up to it most
Yes.
of the time. So firstly, we need to have a nervous system that is functional. So if your nervous system is in freeze response or, a fight and flight, we need to bring it back into, a sense of calmness first. Because some people, what they do is they have a trauma and they jump back into it. And I think it's the worst thing you can do, because you actually deepen it, you re-traumatize yourself. And I'm not a believer in re-traumatization. So what I really work with people on is firstly building up your sense of I am, your sense of self, so that you can objectively look at certain scenarios and actually change your perspective. And also, which means looking at the trauma not from the eyes of the victim part of yourself, but on, okay, that is what happened. What is the opportunity for my own soul in terms of learning, growing, deepening? How do I turn that around so that it's not inverting on itself? And, because we know that even if we're, like you were saying, even if we don't remember things, doesn't matter. It's still attacks, inside. And so, I really work on that. I work a lot with the nervous system and the state of make sure that your nervous system is in a good place to go into a deeper trauma. Also, I really feel like uh, I've seen this and I have done it very early on in my kind of healing teaching career, where people push to get somebody to go deeper into their feelings. I don't push anymore. I really, really focus on gentleness and nothing forced, really allowing for things to appear when the person's ready
Yeah.
to appear.
Yeah, I don't wanna spike that cortisol if you don't have to.
Well, no, and they, and people sometimes say, "Oh, I don't understand. I've been doing this for a while, and now the deeper stuff's really coming out." And it's like, well, what's there not to understand? You weren't ready
Yeah.
at the beginning to face this stuff. So you had to build yourself up to this point, to face something that was so harsh and traumatic
Right.
for you. And if I can share a really quick story,
Yes.
I was in Europe recently, and I taught a lot in France, and one of my best friends lives there, and also a lady who was like a mother figure for me when I used to travel there, and she organized my events at times. She translated for me. I stayed at her house and so on. Anyway, her daughter contacted me and a few other people saying that she has dementia, which, was really kind of upsetting. And when I was there, her daughter kept in touch with me, and she was saying to me, just tell me what to do. How, what can I do? Because it's getting worse. And I remember thinking, I don't know what to say to her because I know this lady's story. And it was like she had a very traumatic breakup from her husband literally 20 years before, more than 20 years ago. And, they had so much pain and conflict that was never, she tried to process this, but she just was never strong enough to do it in a way that was, transformed into not seeing him as an enemy. And I said to her daughter, I mean, I don't know at this stage that it's to do with your dad. It's to do with this trauma that hasn't been processed, that is blocking her head, and she's going back into it and she cannot move on. And I'm like, I can do some clearing, but I don't know if it's too late or not. I just don't know. But I'm telling you, that's what it's about. And she said, "Oh, okay, thank you." And I really didn't think much would happen from this conversation. Because when I did meet up with this lady, she didn't know how to speak English, and she was fluent and perfect in English. She could only speak French, which was lucky that my friend was there. But then a few weeks ago, I was messaging and saying, "How is your mom?" To this friend of to her daughter, whose name is Sarah also. And she said to me, "Oh my God, I have to tell you something magical that actually happened." Because her mom, I was scared. Like, she came down the lift to meet me and forgot the keys. So we didn't know how to go back. I was saying to Sarah, "I am really concerned." And Sarah said, this is a couple of weeks ago. She said, "Oh my God, Ina, yeah, I was meaning to contact you, but a month after you left, my mom and dad started connecting after 15 years of not talking at all. And she said they're speaking every week on the phone. And she said, Mom is getting a lot better and she's stable and her memory is coming back. And I was just like, wow, oh my God,
Oh,
amazing.
that there's so much to be said. So much we don't know, but so much we're starting to know, and the levels that trauma can go. And that's just an amazing story, an amazing work that you're doing. So how can people find you?
So the easiest way is to go to innasegal.com. So INNASEGAL.com. And I would encourage people to go there and sign up for masterclass, because that's where a lot of the pieces will come together, but then you also get to do the process. And the easiest
The
way to remember it
preparation.
is exactly
Preparation is key. Yeah.
is to just go innersegal.com/masterclass. So not hard. And give yourself that experience of really connecting with your own body. And like I said, then if you want to go further, I do a lot of courses every year that people can join. Some they can get immediately and start working with that have been recorded, and some they have to come to live because it's deeper. And, I have a lot of support team to make sure that everyone is going through the process in the healthiest way and not kind of forcing, pushing, or, you know, having
Something you're not ready
meltdowns.
for. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's great. And I'll put all of that information into the show notes, and then they will have this episode to revert back to and listen to. Amazing information, amazing messy story. I always say to my guests, "What an incredible messy story!" But yes, you are certainly in the top there. And well done on just being able to sort of hone in and have that self-awareness and be able to pay it forward and bring others into that, and, share your talents with other people that, are stuck, in that little, black hole we talk about. And that's, we're getting better, but we have that, generation or so that just, took the hits for us, right? And so trying to make something positive is amazing.
It is. And I just want to say my daughter is just turned 22, and she's actually studying to be a holistic counselor and an art therapist. And she was saying to me that they had a session in her course discussing, generational trauma. And she's the youngest. And she was saying that, Mum, all the women, who are in their 40s like I am, it was saying, we don't know if this work is going to impact our children doing this generational healing, the releasing of trauma and all this stuff. And she said, I can tell you, my mum's been doing this work since, I was born, and it makes a huge, 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 massive difference.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
it's, and it was just so acknowledging and beautiful, to hear it both from her and, that she was able to inspire these women to go
Yes.
do the work, and it absolutely impacts your children.
Yeah. And I mean, we've heard too, I've had guests on this show that talk about trauma in the womb even, and just whatever's going on. I mean, that it goes and it's all connected, and especially with relatives, it just gets passed down and it's there. And, now that we kind of had this path of what to do with it, right? And, especially if you are having physical manifestations of that trauma, this is a good start for sure.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah. We can
wonderful.
talk
Thank you
about that a
so
lot.
much. Thank you so much, Ina. This has been very, very insightful and very joyful, and I appreciate you sharing the story. And I use the word joyful just because I get excited of the possibilities of where we are now, not necessarily referring to your story because that is definitely traumatizing, but just what you're able to do with it going forward. So thank you
But
so
it
much for
is.
coming.
I
Yeah.
would agree. It is exciting because I could have spent my whole life being in the victim and, blaming everything. And so, as much as it was difficult and traumatic at different times, it's also been joyful, like
Yeah.
you said, and very fulfilling to be able to do this type of work. So, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. Thank you, Ina, so much for being on
Yeah.
Everything's Messy. Thanks for listening to Everything's Messy podcast. Whew, if you made it this far, give yourself a gold star or at least a nap. Honestly, if you showed up today and you were listening, you've already crushed it. I'm so grateful for you listening. If anything hit home, share it, tag me, write it on a sticky note. I don't care. Just don't keep all of this messy goodness to yourself. You can find me on Instagram at Everything's Messy Wellness or over at my website, everythingsmessywellness.com, where I've got resources, coaching, and probably a new rant about blood sugar or something that's just nonsense. It's all waiting for you. Check out my YouTube channel. I've got all of my podcast episodes up there. And I'm on X at Everything's Mess. Or if you just want to send me an email, Sarah at everythingsmessywellness.com. Look, until next time, hydrate, take no crap, and as always, keep it messy.